roots, cells are dividing actively, primarily concerned with growth. That's their aim. I said the first basis of growth is cell division, which involves mitosis and meiosis. So this meristem, that is the tip of the stem and the roots, are actively dividing. They are dividing almost every time for the purpose of growth. Then the root cap is responsible for protecting the tender growth of the root as it passes through the soil. Now we move on further to talk about secondary growth. Secondary growth takes place both in the stem and the roots by the division of the cambium. Note, it is not all plants that undergoes secondary growth. Why? Cambium is very, very essential for secondary growth. For instance, in monocots, you don't have secondary growth because they don't have cambium. It's only in dicots that you have secondary growth occurring because they have cambium. And the secondary growth takes place in both stem and roots by the division of cambium, which is found between the xylem and the phloem in the vascular plant part of the plant. So the cambium is found in between the xylem and the phloem of the vascular part of the plant. The xylem. The xylem is the vessel that transports water from the root of the plant. It's the one that carries water. It transports it from the root of the plant to other part of the plant body, while the phloem is the vascular tissue that carries food. Food is manufactured from the sunlight and it's always occur at the top of the plant. Secondary growth of stem. The secondary thickening is brought about by the cambium. I've mentioned that. Then a complete ring of cambium tissue forms the interfascicular cambium, separating the xylem and the phloem. I said the cambium is found in between the xylem and the phloem. The cambium cells are majorly responsible for increase in girth or the width of the plant. So you discover that when you compare the stem of a monocot or an herb with the stem of a tree, say an iroko tree, the difference is so wide. Especially you discover that the size you can't compare it. And I said you don't have cambium in monocots, but you have it in dicots or in woody plants. So the cambium is responsible for increase in girth or in the width. That is the width of the stem of the plant. That's what the cambium does. That's why you don't have it in the stem. Then the secondary xylem consists of scalariform and pitted vessels, the tracheids, the xylem fibers, and the xylem parenchyma, while the secondary phloem consists of the sieve tube, the companion cells, the phloem fibers, and the phloem parenchyma. So we are just talking about what the secondary xylem and the secondary phloem is made up of. In the secondary xylem, you have the scalariform, you have the pitted vessels, the tracheids, the xylem fibers, and the xylem parenchyma. While in the secondary phloem, you have the sieve tube, the companion cells, the phloem fibers, and the phloem parenchyma. A cork cambium later produces a thick epidermal layer of waterproof cork, which eventually forms the bark. I said earlier that the cambium cells are responsible for increase in the girth of the plants. Now, also, we have what we call a cork cambium. Cork cambium is the one that produces the thick epidermal layer that forms the bark of the tree. And the bark of the tree is a waterproof one. So a thick epidermal layer of waterproof cork, which eventually forms the bark. I believe you know what the bark of the tree is, the hard part that you can peel off. That's the outermost part of the stem. That's what is called the bark. And this is a diagram of a secondary growth of stem. And just see look at the diagram of the secondary growth of the stem. Now we move on to the secondary growth of a root. How does the secondary growth of a root happen? As the plant increases in size, especially in perennials such as a tree, the xylem is not sufficient to conduct the water needed, and the amount is increased by secondary thickening. I said earlier that the xylem conducts water from the roots of the plants to the other part of the body. But by the time the plant has so much grown and increased in size so big, the xylem is no longer sufficient to conduct water that is needed for the plants. So it is increased, the amount of water is now increased by what we call secondary thickening. The cells in the pericycle form a cork cambium, which produces cork to the outside and a secondary cortex to the inside. I mentioned the cork cambium also in the stem the other time, that the cork cambium is the one that forms the bark of the tree in the stem now. But now in the roots, the cells in the pericycle also forms a cork cambium, which is called phylogeny, and which produces cork to the outside, and also a secondary cortex called the phylloderm, which this one is now to the inside of the plant. All tissues outside the cork die off. However, the bark of the roots, unlike the stem, forms a thin covering layer. The bark of the stem is so thick, very thick, and people have made herbs from it. They are so thick. But the bark of the root now, they are so thin, unlike what we have in the stem. The secondary thickening does not take place in monocotyledons. I've mentioned that earlier, so let it stick now that you don't have secondary thickening in monocot. And why? Because they do not have cambium cells. They don't have cambium cells. So this is the diagram of the secondary growth of the roots. So we'll now be talking about the aspects of growth. The parameters generally used in determining the growth of an organism is the length or the height or the width of the organism and the dry weight of the representative samples of a population. So when you want to determine the growth of a particular organism, you can determine it by measuring the length, the height, the width of the organism, and the dry weight of the representative samples of the population. In taking the dry weight, it means you have to just select some samples of the population. For instance, the plant population that you want to measure their growth by using the dry weight. You just let some of the plants in that same population, you dry it in the oven before you measure the weight, so you can determine whether growth is occurring or not. So we want to look at the factors that is necessary for healthy growth of plants. What are the factors that are necessary for the healthy growth of plants? And I've been able to divide those factors into two: the external factors that you can see, then the internal factors. Or the external factors are the factor that eventually you see the effects. It is visible to the eyes, and one of such is nutrient availability. When sufficient nutrients are available in the soil for the plant to grow, it will be very healthy. But when there is deficiency of nutrients, the plant becomes stunted, or it becomes yellow. It's yellowish, and the leaves begin to fall off, and before you know it, the plant is gone. So nutrient availability is a very, very crucial factor for healthy growth of plants. The next is accumulation of byproducts of metabolism. When the plant does not undergo or does not discharge toxic substances properly and begins to accumulate it, the plant is going to die soon, because those substances are toxic, are harmful to the body of the plant. So it is necessary that excretion process is efficient in the plant, or else the plant will accumulate the toxic substance and eventually die. The next point in the external factor is temperature. Each plant has the temperature that is necessary for its growth. A higher temperature will affect the plant, may make the plant to wilt. Then a lower temperature will not make the plant do well. When the environment is too cold, the plant's growth the plant will not be active. While it is also too hot, the plant might die. Light intensity and duration is another external factor that is necessary for healthy growth of plants. The amount of light that the plant receives and the time, the duration with which that light is available is necessary. We said that plants are autotrophs, that is, they manufacture their own food by themselves and they do it in the presence of sunlight. So the sunlight is very, very essential to them. If the light intensity is low, then photosynthetic activities will be reduced. That is, the plant will not grow well. But if it is high enough for the plant, then the plant will be active and it will grow well. Another external factor is the hydrogen ion concentration, which I also call the pH value. When the soil is too acidic, the plant won't do well. Also, when it is too basic, it will also not do well. So you have to, for a conducive or a healthy growth of your plants, you have to know the pH that works well for the soil and for the plant so that you can maintain it. Or else you won't have healthy growth of your plant. The next factor is water. Water is very essential because it is